What could not work on our show?
Right. Never.
It's fun. As soon as people join, they're going to see the special announcement that we have. I like that.
Ooh. Very nice. I was going to go straight into that. Is that cool?
Absolutely.
Great.
We're live, man. Feel free to go whenever you're ready.
Cool. Oh, yeah. Actually, I want to get the chat open. Sorry, 1 second. Come on. Come on. Why is it not doing it?
What are you looking for?
Window capture. My backup recording. I guess I'm just going to do it for the audio only. That's fine.
Cool.
My picture's messed up. Here we go. Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy on the big 550 KTRS. It's Phil here, and I'm back with my friend Matt Baker. It's been a couple of weeks, and I'm excited to be back. Matt, normally this is when I ask you how you're doing, and we chit-chat a little bit, but we've got more important things to talk about. We've got a big announcement.
We've got some business to take care of, right, Phil? I'm excited to be with you this week. I'm excited to talk about Real Salt Lake, St. Louis City, but before we get into that, a little housekeeping for Flyover Footy, as we are incredibly proud and excited to announce that our first ever presenting sponsor for our podcast, Noble Ice Vineyards, the wine partner of St. Louis City. Noble Ice was founded in 2005. They are a first, second, and third generation female-owned and operated winery in the heart of Augusta, Missouri, just 40 minutes west of St. Louis. They continue to honor the long tradition of winemaking in this historic region of Augusta with their robust, high-quality wine portfolio, also pushing the envelope on innovation through their line of canned swirl sangria, which you may find at City Park. Noble Ice Vineyards' mission is to encourage wine drinkers to celebrate and fall in love with local wine. You can check them out at their website, nobleicevineyards.com and drinkswirl.com, as well as find their products locally at Schnucks, Total Wine, and other stores around the area. Phil, we are so incredibly excited to have Noble Ice on board for Flyover Footy in 2024.
So excited, so lucky. I mean, this is a real wonderful move for us, and I hope Noble Ice is extremely happy. I'm especially happy because I grew up, I mean, literally, I'm that kid that my parents would take me on the tours and all the wineries in St. Louis and in Augusta and Defiance and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would do the tours, and my parents would always let me get those couple sips of wine. And that was back before they really cared. You know, if you were like a 12-year-old kid, they're like, hey, I'm giving my son a sip of wine. Is that okay? And they pour it out for him and it would be fine. I think it's harder to do now. I'm not sure how it works, but
I don't know if you get away with that one nowadays, but
but I loved it. I loved it as a kid. I've loved wine ever since a young age, younger than usual. And I'm just so excited that this is our very first sponsor. It's so much fun. What do you think, Matt?
The synergy between their support for soccer already, their support for us doing what we love to do. I mean, I couldn't ask for a better partner, a better sponsor in this. Not just because of all the things I mentioned, the third generation female owned and operated winery here in Missouri, a local winery, St. Louis City's wine partner. They serve their sangrias or their swirl sangrias at City Park. I mean, it's just exciting. And really, when we look at who we wanted to have on board, this was a no-brainer.
Absolutely. And they carry, the Missouri grape, the Norton, which I'm sure we'll talk about in one of these episodes. So I'm really excited about trying that. I've got some in my hand here that I'll be sampling throughout the show again, as I did last night. And I think we'll touch on it in the wind down as well. If you're listening on the radio on the big 550 KTRS, don't be confused. This isn't just a 30-minute ad. We will talk about this in our podcast more in the second version that is not on the radio. So please do check that out as we talk about that and other soccer things. We go a little more laid back and more in depth, sometimes less in depth, depending on how you look at it. So please join us there if you are enjoying the show today. But Matt, let's transition here. Let's get into what we really talk about, which is the nitty gritty of the week in, week out St. Louis City soccer. And we dig into what the players are up to, statistics, what the other team is going to do in this game. And we're going to dig into all that today as well. But first, we're going to start with player availability updates. I love that we put this first now. It's kind of what I look for first anyway.
I think it's one of the most important things that people keep in mind. I know it's on press conference day, Thursdays. It's the thing everybody wants to know is what is the status of our players going into this upcoming week? And it's a good news, bad news situation. Joachim Nilsson, we found out earlier this week, is going to be out for a period of time due to a broken rib. Not quite sure when or how this happened. I hope it didn't happen on his bicycle kick, but the last update we had on Nilsson is he's doing some cardio stuff on a bike. He's obviously still struggling with the broken rib. So most of the WebMD type things tell us that the broken rib takes 6 weeks or so to heal. Professional athletes, I don't know, faster, slower, it depends. But we're out. Nilsson is out for a period of time. Edu Leuven also out. So he was training on the side, doing some agility work, doing some individual running drills as he rehabs as well. So Bradley Carnell said very specifically he's out this weekend. That's the bad news. The good news is that Tim Parker is doing well recovering from his back injury. He was in training this week. The club has progressed him nicely, Carnell said, and he should be available for this weekend. So if you're looking for those starting 11 projections, look for Tim Parker in a lot of people's as a smart call. Another couple of players that Carnell called out are Nicholas Dewar. Nicholas Dewar has no injury concerns. Please don't worry about that. But Carnell said he is ready to go as far as can he go 90 minutes? The only question is he hasn't gotten a full 90 under his belt, so that remains to be seen if he can fully go 90. But after having gone into the second half last week, it seems like he's at that progression point where if you can go about 60, you can go 90. Kyle Hebert was the only other player that Bradley Carnell called out, notable in the fact that he called him out as we're suffering from center back issues, but he mentioned the fact that he played with City 2 last weekend. He had the goal, and so he just had an overall good game, got his minutes that they needed, and Carnell was excited for Hebert's availability going forward. Whether that is a preview of Hebert starting this weekend or not remains to be seen.
I enjoyed Tom Timmerman's quote from the Post-Dispatch. If you're a St. Louis City center back, you might want to start questioning your decisions going forward because the luck has not been on our side. But I will say that it is lucky in a way, or it's nice that Parker is able to kind of step in as Nilsson, maybe, as a secondary good thing to a bad thing. But that is nice. Dewar being able to go longer. I don't know. A lot of people are pretty upset about the Nilsson thing, right? That's the first gut reaction before you start thinking about the human being is, man, This guy's been injured so much. That really does suck for St. Louis. Sucks even more for Nilsson, of course. I'm sure he's not happy about it. But
and to that point of Tom Timmerman's article, Bradley Carnell and Indiana Vassilev on Thursday in the press conference were both protective of their center backs. It's all jovial, it's all joking, of course, but they definitely were protective in a fun manner, knowing that it's obviously just a coincidence having center backs go down in the way that they have been.
Yeah, absolutely. Kyle Hebert is a favorite of mine, so I'm excited to see him back. I guess let's start digging into RSL just a little bit here. From the sky view, perhaps, of where we stand.
Let's preview RSL, and as we always do, we start with the standings, how the teams' forms have been coming into this. Both teams sit tied for third in the West on 7 points, though their paths to get there have been pretty vastly different. St. Louis City is 1-0-4 with 1 win and 4 draws, 7 points, plus 2 goal differential, having scored 10 goals themselves. Their form in the last 3 MLS games, draw, more draw. They drew Austin, they drew the Galaxy, and they drew DCU 2, 3, and 2, respectively. They're unbeaten in their last 5, unbeaten in 5 to start the season, but at the same time, they are winless in their last 3. Real Salt Lake comes into this 2-2-1, 2 wins, 2 losses, and a draw on their 7 points, plus 1 goal differential, having scored 7 goals in their 5 games and allowing 6. Their form, and they've only played 3 games since they last played St. Louis, so that's a storyline to follow on this one, is a 3-0 win at home against LAFC, a 2-1 loss at home to Colorado in their Rocky Mountain Cup, and a 2-1 win against Vancouver away last weekend. So they have some marquee wins in this stretch of games, namely LAFC, which was very impressive for this team. And they look to shore up their home form, welcoming St. Louis this weekend.
Yeah, a different RSL, right? I think we're going to dig into that quite a bit. I think a lot of people watched that RSL versus Miami game, and, I think people thought it was going to be a blowout of sorts. And RSL, well, they struggled against a really classically good team, beautiful playing team. There were certain things that stood out to me about that team, so I'm not surprised to see this form looking decently good early in the season. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, and the way that the expectation is from the RSL side, having Drew St. Louis 1-1, is they need to get back in form at home. So they've struggled finding that consistency. They've had to test their depth early on with injuries, and this international window really hit them hard. So they've had the opportunity to test their depth. The depth has come up in key moments, especially in this past week against Vancouver. One of the players we're going to talk about, Fidel Barajas, is just point perfect right there of that example of players who have been given a chance earlier than expected and really had a masterful game against Vancouver. In addition to just trying to shore up their home form, just seeing if they can piece it together for an entire game, which they haven't in the past few games, falling short against Colorado, having kind of a tale of two games against Vancouver, and trying to get back into the form they had against LAFC. That's where their matchup of the season was so far. And it's going to be a tough test for St. Louis. The matchup itself that we're going to get into, as far as the styles of play, the individual matchups. In our chat, Colton Cook calls out he's looking forward to Andres Gomez and Nicholas Dewar. That left side City matchup, right side RSL. That's going to be interesting to watch. And there's some interesting system things at play here, Phil. I think as we look high level on this one, Bradley Carnell did say in Thursday. I asked him about that left side, whether it was a weakness, whether it was individual, it was the cause of a system failure to an extent. And his response was basically it's the fall guy, essentially, that left side of St. Louis. So when we're thinking about the formation and the way that we've been exposed on the left side, Bradley Carnell's looking at what led into that occurring, not necessarily the fact that you have 1v1s where either Marcanic or Dewar are being beaten, and allowing crosses, allowing balls into the box from their side. But it's how did they end up on that island by themselves that Carnell seems more interested to work on. And so that's one of the big storylines that I'm very interested in as we will talk about formations and styles of play going on. Ultimately, RSL is looking at this game similar to how St. Louis did last week, a home game where you need 3 points out of it.
Super quickly, there was a really cool Joe Lowry article on MLSsoccer.com, and he pointed out a tweet by Ben Wright, which was that goal from DC United where Lesane definitely coordinated a certain play to draw up the left back, and that was where Jared Strout was just in wide open space for that second goal. And so to Benteke, right? And so I like that Carnell kind of pointed that out, that he is the fall guy, but clearly other teams are noticing that there is, an opening there. So I'm curious if that gets shored up in any way, or if, maybe withdrawing other players. I don't know if like pushing the left back is the answer.
No, and that seems like it's counterintuitive to the system that St. Louis has. It's more so being susceptible to overloads, I think. And that example that you had where that second goal last week against DC United, that was more a lapse in communication, I think, between Nilsson and Dewar, where they almost collided. I think they did collide against each other at one point, trying to pinch one of their center mids. And the style that St. Louis has can be susceptible to overloads if they're stretched out. So in transition, that's how RSL scored their goal the first time we played them, was in transition, overloading the right side of the field. Matt Crooks was masterful in his orchestrating the transition play on that goal. And that's how I would doubt that RSL is going to try to do much else other than work the ball like they usually do centrally, using transition, but also overloading some of the wings and the half spaces if they're able to.
Yeah, definitely. I just thought that was an interesting tweet by them. Matt, I know you talked to the guys from the RSL show. I see you have some quotes here if you wanted to dig into some of that.
Yeah, the RSL show guys were fantastic, and some of the stuff that we're bringing tonight are courtesy of them. And this matchup in and of itself, Phil, is fascinating simply for the fact that this is the second time we've played them already, and we're not even out of March. That's a little bit absurd, and it's going to happen a couple more times this season. I know it's going to happen to Vancouver and I think Portland, where we're going to have some pretty quick turnarounds from when we played, and that gives kind of an interesting dynamic that Bradley Carnell really doesn't attribute to benefiting either team. Neither of these teams are too vastly changed from what they were just 5 weeks ago. Yeah, there's some injuries on both sides that we're going to talk about as well, but the teams are still trying to cement their styles. Pablo Mastroeni, Bradley Carnell, both trying to cement who their teams are in 2024. And so you look to what happened earlier this season with the opener at City Park against RSL, and you'd probably expect a lot of the same. The stats that we're going to get into really back up the fact that these are two teams who can play their own style without disrupting what the other one is trying to accomplish. Unlike a game like DC United where somebody has to possess the ball, this is more like RSL the first time, or the LA Galaxy, in fact, where we're not going to have possession. We're going to deal with RSL's possession and transition. We're going to be able to fight on our counterattack. And there's a lot of players on the RSL side that the RSL show and that they were able to tell us about and kind of talk through. Alex Napolis from the RSL shows, who I spoke to prior to this one, first among them. I mean, we can't get past anything RSL without talking about Chicho Arango, right? Chicho Arango was fantastic against Vancouver, orchestrating their attack. If you're not familiar with Chicho Arango, he's a 29-year-old Colombian designated player. He's in his second year with RSL, so he's getting to know the people. He likes playing in the space. It's his fourth total year in MLS. He spent 2 with LAFC, and he had a short stint with Pachuca in Liga MX. And Chicho Arango is who their offense will flow up to. It goes through a lot of the other players that we'll describe here in a minute, but Chicho Arango is the guy that you have to watch, and you have to figure that if it's Parker and Yarrow or Hebert, you're going to look to mark Chicho Arango. And it wouldn't surprise me if that's Josh Yarrow's responsibility if he's on the field.
I agree. He does seem to shade to that left side a little bit. And Chicho Arango, I think the last time we saw him, it felt like he wasn't heated up quite yet, right? It felt like he was missing some goals, some shots that he probably should have at least gotten on goal. And perhaps we can compare that to Klaus so far this year too. Who knows? But, after that, I saw several highlights following in the weeks of him looking much, much better. So we might have a little bit more in our hands on that one. But, we still haven't touched on injuries, which is also going to come into play, of course. But I see we have lots more players we can talk about here.
Well, let's go right into yours, Fidel Barajas. Fidel Barajas is, there's a lot to talk about Fidel Barajas, but what's interesting is what his role will be against St. Louis City in all likelihood. So I mentioned Fidel Barajas is coming off of just a fantastic game against Vancouver. He had 2 assists. The guy is 17 years old. He came to them from Charleston Battery in, I believe it was a $250,000 transfer from that side. RSL seems like a side in general who like to plunder the USL Championship. That's where they found Diego Luna, right? And so this is a theme for them. And the expectation when we first played RSL is that Fidel Barajas would be coming on a little slower. He would maybe middle of the season, and he even spoke to this post game where he expected to be doing what he's doing now just 3 or 4 months from now. And the international call-ups, the injuries have forced their hand a little bit, given him a bit more of an opportunity. And Joe Lowry did an article on him on Backfielder, included him in one of his articles, and he had a host of fantastic things to say about Fidel Barajas. So just as we think about what he did, 2 assists against Vancouver, some amazing through balls, he's described as a skillful attacker who showed that in Vancouver, occupying the left half space for Pablo Mastroeni's side. Joe Lowry said that his pace isn't elite. He's still working on his 1v1 dribbling. He has efficient touches, speed of thought, and passing execution to make some incredible plays happen, and which basically mean like he's still getting up to speed in MLS, right? He comes from USL Championship. He's only 17 years old. There is a learning curve, and so he's still going through that. And when you talk about what we should expect from Fidel Barajas against St. Louis City, I have him slotted in as a second half sub. I think the returners from international duty, the returners from both injury and suspension are going to leave him out of the starting 11 in all likelihood. But this kid he's a spark plug, and he'll have the ability to come on strong in the second half, as well as a ton of confidence from this Vancouver game.
Yeah, I think the goal is to bring him along similar to Luna. When Luna first came in, he was playing on the left side. Of course, he wasn't playing every single game at this point. And now you see Luna is bossing the midfield, right? That's his role and often in the case. And so I think the goal is bring him Barajas on as much as you can. And then once Luna moves on, hopefully to Europe, USA, let's go. But Barajas maybe moves to the central role because, his 1v1, it's not what he's there for. He's there for his special skills, his creativity, his shot, and his passing. So obviously that is something I'm surprised we're seeing assists so soon, but I'm loving to see it. And I'm glad we're talking about this now, because this is where I share that I just spent spring break with my kids in Charleston, and I passed the
Hey,
Charleston Battery field. So that's where Barajas came from, and beautiful place to play right there on the river leading to the ocean. Beautiful city, had a great time. So love Barajas. You knew I was going to say a little bit too much there, Matt. But let me do a station call real quick. We are Flyover Footy. We are a podcast that talks about St. Louis soccer, of course, and we're really digging in deep with St. Louis going up against Real Salt Lake this weekend. And you're listening perhaps on the radio, the Big 550 KTRS. Boy, I did have 2 weeks off, haven't I? Let's
get
move
that
on,
rust
though.
off.
Exactly. I got to shake it off. More players, though. A couple more to talk about here.
You know, and I specifically wanted to call out this week changes or differences and focus on some of those newer things that have occurred, because if you really want to know about our matchup against them from the first game 5 weeks ago, we not only have our pod in our history on that, but we also had a dedicated special where I interviewed Alex Napolis from the RSL show. So check that out in our backlog if you want more details on this RSL side. But one change to RSL since we played them is the loss of Pablo Ruiz. He went down to a season-ending injury. Losing them was called a huge loss, obviously, but Alex says that he believes that this team is more set up than they were last season to have a guy like Pablo Ruiz go out and to kind of pick up where he left off. There's no true replacement, but Amika Anil has really cemented his spot alongside Brian Ojeda in the midfield, and that's helped ease their midfield along into playing and creating without Pablo Ruiz. The ball still flows through these two. It's still designed to be a transition through the middle team, but this Ojeda Anil midfield has been crucial to RSL's success between the first time we've played them and this week, crediting them to the Vancouver win just as much as their midfield struggled against Colorado when Brian Ojeda was out with a suspension. Now, getting to know a couple of these players. So Amika Anil is a 24-year-old 2023 Super Draft pick. He was the 25th overall pick. He's in his second season with RSL. He started 13 out of his 21 games played last year, and he's been a consistent starter this year, more out of necessity than anything else. Brian Ojeda, his midfield partner, we're more familiar with him, 23-year-old midfielder from Paraguay, started 22 of his 30 games played last year, and he's been a consistent starter this year. So they're the ones who are really going to be progressing the ball. And in fact, they are two of their three leaders in completed passes. So that tells you where they send the ball to and where they send the ball from most of the time. And it's going to flow through Anil, and it's going to flow through Brian Ojeda just as much as it is their center backs like Justin Glad.
I'm actually excited to see how these guys do. I don't think Ruiz had an incredible game against St. Louis, but I know he is a favorite in the league, especially a favorite to RSL fans. But, I'm excited to see how these backups do. I don't know why. I find myself rooting for RSL a little bit because they do give people chances, kind of like City does.
Sure.
And so I will like to see them, how well they do. Hopefully, of course, City shuts them down. But I'm interested to see how the backups do.
And there's going to be some interesting matchups that come from this. So knowing that RSL will play the ball through their center mids, I think that provides an opportunity for either our center mids or our attacking wingers to maybe invert a little bit in our press. And so there's the stats we're going to get into a little bit will show how the press works for both teams and where the point of inflection is or point of engagement on the field. But knowing that it's Anil and it's Ojeda that the ball is going to flow through before it gets to guys like Diego Luna and Andres Gomez, who are just, it almost goes without saying. We deep dived into them earlier in the season. But I look for when we get into what our starting lineup's going to be, maybe guys like Chris Durkin, Tomas Ostrak. If AZ is in the game centrally, it could be a good opportunity for him to see how they engage with their center mids. And if they are successful and how they try to drive the ball from them. Do they try to drive it to a particular part of the field as much as it is trying to create that turnover? And if so, where? That's going to be one of those interesting battles for me to watch.
Yeah, and when I saw that clip of DC United that I was mentioning earlier, a lot of this, less so with a team like RSL, but even with that, it's like this weird game of chicken where if St. Louis presses well enough, then no one's going to have room to pass, and then they have to get braver, and so it's their job to try to break the press one way or another. I'm not sure. It's just this game of chicken of like who's going to break first, who's going to make the mistake first in a lot of ways. Like, can RSL pass out of us, or can St. Louis get those turnovers? And so teams like RSL, when I saw them playing against Miami, they're just really good at like cutting out passing lanes and not like pressing, but once the pass gets into the midfield, like they kind of pounce. It reminds me a lot of like Minnesota United was incredible at that when we played them last year. And so, I'm interested to see what happens with what you just said, Matt,
Yep.
and how RSL responds defensively with that.
Yep. One quick note as we get ready to pivot into some more team-based stats and look at how the teams themselves stack up and how they're going to play is this will also be the first game since the referee lockout ended. And so there's some comments in our chat mentioning the fact that Drew Fisher is the official for this game, and he officiated the CONCACAF Nations League final between the USA and Mexico the other night. So it will be, and he's a high level official. He's got a wealth of experience in addition to this high profile game. So it'll be interesting to see if that impacts anything at all. I know he's going to do it's safe to say he's going to do a better job of controlling the game than what we saw against DC United, but it will be interesting to see if this affects the card situation, which St. Louis has been not shy about getting yellow cards. And as we get into games 5, 6, 7, etc. in the season, yellow card suspensions start to rear their ugly head. I know Thomas Totland has a few that is worth keeping an eye on. So that's just one of those underlying stories as well. Going into this, the referee lockout is over and what we can expect to see as far as the quality there.
He did a great job with the USA-Mexico game. Now, I think these guys are becoming more professional, and it's not as ugly a game with USA-Mexico, but still, I thought he called a great game on that. We all need to learn this. We need to learn how to compliment referees more often instead of tear them down. I think we're finding out how lucky we are to have them back, and especially this weekend. I'm sure we will as well.
Yeah, so let's dig into some of the team stats that are really fascinating if you look under the hood of this. Some of them are kind of obvious, like RSL's possession-based offense. They're the 5th most possession-based team in MLS right now, averaging 55.6% possession. St. Louis is the 8th least in MLS, averaging just 47. But it has been such a roller coaster on possession for St. Louis City this season. Last year, how many times did we say if we possess the ball more than 50%, it's almost an automatic L? This year, with 1 win and 4 draws, we've had 40%, 45, 59, 34, and 57. I mean, it doesn't get any more up and down than that, but it's playing teams that it's almost not the other team imposing their style necessarily, but it's a willingness to orchestrate offensive outbursts despite the fact that the other team either wants the ball or doesn't want the ball. We're willing to be that jack of all trades type thing. We just need to work on ensuring the fact that we're not masters of none. I think it's without saying that RSL is going to lead this game in possession. The only time that they fell below 50% possession was against Miami, their first game. Miami leads the entire league in possession by a long shot. And so it's not just possession, though, that's going to inform how this game is played. It's some of the stats that we love to get into, looking at sequence times, looking at PPDA, and we've got a stat of the night here in a minute. So knowing that St. Louis has the lowest sequence time in MLS, the fewest passes per sequence, they're the most direct team. RSL's kind of middle of the pack when it comes to the directness. So this is part of their possession work where they do not mind possessing the ball, working it around, playing it through their midfielders, and then resetting if they need to. But when they do make their movement towards the offensive final third, it's going to be very direct. It's going to be one of those, they're going to hit you quick, but they're going to be a little bit methodical in how they do it. And so that's the more interesting thing in how they work. They do marry being a direct transition team with this mostly possession-based offense. It's fascinating to watch, but the passes per defensive action is a stat that's going to lead into my stat of the night. PPDA is something I love to talk about because it's indicative of how well you press as a team. So the lower your PPDA number, the more you press, essentially, the higher up the field. It's how many passes do you allow before you attempt an action on the ball or on a player with the ball. St. Louis is 5th lowest in the league right now. DC United last week was the lowest, and they are the best pressing team right now in the league. St. Louis 5th lowest. RSL's the 10th lowest, which is kind of a middle of the pack as far as pressure applied, though. But the most fascinating thing is how effective they are in doing this. They might be 10th lowest or middle of the pack when it comes to the number of times and the average of their passes per defensive actions. But my stat of the night is high turnovers. It's the number of sequences that start in open play and begin 40 meters or less from the opponent's goal. So if you think about how long a soccer field is, anywhere from like around 120 yards, this is at or just outside the final third when you're gaining possession of the ball. RSL and St. Louis are the top two teams in total high turnovers forced, with 69 and 60 respectively. RSL and St. Louis are also the top two teams in shot ending high turnovers with 18 and 14. So not even, I would say, 30, 40% of these high turnovers end in a shot, but they're the highest teams in both of these categories. And when you see a team like St. Louis, you expect that, right? That's St. Louis's bread and butter. But it's a fascinating stat to have RSL be leading the league in high turnovers and shot ending high turnovers. I think that speaks to the intentionality of when they do decide to initiate that action against their opposition. And that's something St. Louis is going to have to be careful for. Bradley Carnell talks about moments all the time. We talk about how moments change everything because with an offense like St. Louis, you have to rely on some of those moments. And this RSL team is a team that can change the game on a dime if they're effective in one of these high press turnovers that are forced after possessing the ball 55, 60% of the time. So there's a lot that they offer that we have to watch out for going over to Sandy, Utah.
You're listening to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. Thank you so much for joining us today as we talk about St. Louis City about to face Real Salt Lake this weekend. You might even be in your car on the way to the game. So please enjoy these stats and information. You're going to be more educated as you get to this game here. But yeah, I love that, Matt. That's really cool. And I always say this, but anytime a team is good at getting turnovers, again, I think people expect City to be good at this. Like you said, those kind of turnover stats because of the way they're so rabid and they press and they're all over the pitch. But again, it's just as good sometimes to wait for the ball to get to you and then swarm it once it gets to you. And I do think, even though it's not as rabid, it's not as crazy and frantic looking, chaotic is a word that I think Carnell and Lutz both like to use, creating chaos. It's still effective. And so that's really cool. We can look side by side looking at how RSL gets their turnovers versus how City gets their turnovers. Yep. Really good stats there, Matt. I enjoyed that.
Another thing I like to look at are offenses. How have these teams been in generating offenses? And another interesting stat is how RSL mirrors St. Louis in the volume of outbursts that they have. Both teams are top 5 in shots, St. Louis being 4th, RSL 5th in the league, but both teams are bottom 5 in shot on target percentage. St. Louis is 5th from the bottom with 27.8% of their shots being on target that they take, and RSL is dead last with 24.7% of their shots being on target that they take. So we can expect kind of a shootout in this match. I would expect a lot of attempts on both sides of the field, kind of playing into another stat where key passes. These are the passes that lead directly to a shot, and St. Louis leads the league with 63 of these, RSL being 5th. Both teams are passing the ball, progressing the ball to the points where they're generating a ton of shots, but they're not being effective, neither team, in shots on target or especially finding net. RSL with, of course, only 7 goals in their 5 matches so far. Both teams are top 11 in progressive passes. That's another way you can look at how they move the ball up the field. This is passes that go at least 10 yards from one point to another. RSL's 5th, St. Louis is 11th. It's not unsurprising from St. Louis, but it gives you a little bit of an insight into how RSL moves the ball. They're not this tiki-taka, play the ball, short passes that maybe an LA Galaxy had been doing, but they're not quite to where DC United just sends the ball up the field. A little bit of a mix. They like to, like we mentioned earlier with their center mids, they like to be a little more intentional, spraying the ball on the ground between the center mids and their attacking wingers like Andres Gomez and Diego Luna. And their zones of control of the field, Real Salt Lakes, really reflect that. Where you look at their wings past the half line, and you look at the half spaces and the central before the half line. That's where RSL possesses the ball the most. And so you're looking at Diego Luna, Andres Gomez being successful at possessing the ball out on the wings, and you look at their center mids taking the ball up towards the half line. That's what we can expect from RSL. St. Louis City has been a little more possession happy this year, obviously, as we talked about from some of those games over 50%, but they're doing it a lot on the right side. And so this is where we've talked about RSL and what they can expect, but I find it fascinating how heavily we've relied on Thomas Totland to progress the ball up the field and how well he's worked with Indiana Vasilev and Chris Durkin, especially in getting the ball up consistently. We last year we spent most of the time in our attacking end. We didn't have any kind of possession numbers. So if you looked at who possessed the ball more in our attacking end, it was the other team almost uniformly. This year, our entire right wing is a 50-50 battle as far as when the ball is possessed by certain teams. And then on the left side, we've shown that we actually possess the ball more in the left end line corner than the other team does in general. So I credit Celio Pompeu and Sam Adeniran for that by and large because of their ability to possess the ball in and of itself and their work on the left side when they need to, taking it as far over as possible before usually working the ball back in via a pass. We haven't been crossing the ball as much as we have been. So it's been more playing the ball in from that wide range. But it's an interesting dynamic and plays into what we mentioned earlier of seeing how you flip some of these zones of control and they overlap where they complement each other. So RSL, where in areas of the field like their right goal line end, they don't possess the ball. Our left attacking end line, we do. And so it's things like who's able to be more clinical in their effectiveness on these shots on target, who's able to actually find net when both teams are more than anything happy with what the other team does. It's a complementary style of play that's going to be fascinating to see unfold.
Quickly, two of those stats that really stood out to me, Matt, were that the fact that St. Louis is able to get results, whether their possession has been high or low this year.
Yep.
I'm curious about, and I'm looking also the key passes stat. I know this isn't leaning to XG necessarily, but watching that key passes stat, and just maybe perhaps the finishing isn't there. But again, it doesn't lead to XG necessarily. So I don't know what you feel about this, because some people are feeling like, man, we haven't figured out the final third, but we're still getting results. We're having to possess the ball more than last year at this stage in the game. What do you think about that? I mean, people being kind of negative, but we're seeing some positive things here, aren't we?
We're seeing a lot of success leading up to goal, but it's finishing, and we're underperforming our XG overall. Whereas last year we vastly overperformed it. And Klaus is the number one person that I look at for this, because he led the team with 6 shots last game. So we're finding Klaus. We're getting Klaus in positions where he can take shots, whether it's across from Dewar and a header that doesn't really do anything, it fizzles out, or if we use him more in an off the ball runner that Sam holds up play for. He's getting his opportunities, but he wasn't connecting. And I mentioned on Fallout last week that I would hope that the PK goal Klaus scored is his 2024 version of what happened with Nico Gioacchini last year, where Gioacchini took that PK from Edu Leuven and it kickstarted his season. That's when he found his first goal after Klaus went out. And I want Klaus to be doing the same for this. That striker's mentality is real. And now that Klaus has a goal to his name in 2024, I think this is his chance to really get going. And then at that point, you can do so much more with Sam if you have an effective Klaus, whether it is working with Klaus or whether it's complimenting him off the bench in the second half or vice versa. I think there's a lot that comes in with a more informed Klaus than what we've been seeing so far. And that will just make our offense look better. Like the stats support that our offense has not been anemic by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, we've had 10 goals, 9 non-PK in 5 games. That's not bad. And it's the thought that we've had so many chances, so many shots, and we haven't been able to really take advantage of a lot of those that I think are leaving people thinking, yeah, our offense really isn't flowing in that final third, or we're missing a lot of opportunities, because we kind of have been. And so between Klaus, between Rasmus Alm coming back, who may be a candidate to start, it depends. I mean, he's been progressing his minutes up. Rasmus Alm offers you an entirely different look on the right side that could open things up for a guy like Klaus.
And you look at any sport in the game, basketball, football, you get a superstar, someone that's going to be someone that gets double teamed. You always need that second person to step up in those situations. It looks like, Sam is starting to do that.
Yep.
Klaus is in a new position. It does feel like this is a progression. This is just like last year. There were adjustments throughout the season, things that needed to be figured out, and it only took a few games every time for it to happen. And Klaus is just such a talent, and so far, I would say Carnell hasn't let us down with those adjustments. He's saying what they are out loud in press conferences, and then weeks later we see the adjustment, right? And often it does work out. And so good stuff, right? This is a fun progression. Matt, I love that you're able to kind of point those things out so we can kind of bookmark them throughout the season. And so that's something to watch for. Matt, I apologize. We got to do our lineups, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm not reading my clock incorrectly this time, we need to start digging into formations and predictions. So if you'd like to start us off, please do.
Yeah, my formation is mostly a 4-4-2 again. But I've got some guys that I want to see in this lineup. It's a little more spicy than I usually do because it's not a typical lineup for 2024. I like Berkey and net, obviously, but I've got Nicholas Dewar back in the lineup on the left back side. I think we still go with him. I didn't see a reason not to. I mentioned how Bradley Carnell answered a question in this week's press conference about that left side. If there are any concerns individually, is it a system issue to have these guys be taken advantage of from a Joseph Paintsil, Jared Stroud perspective? And Carnell, just to remember this, said that it's mostly things leading up to that he looks at. So looking at why did they get into that situation? Did they give up the ball and get caught on a transition? How can they mitigate things that lead into that, not reinforce? Like Dewar has to do a better job, or Marcanic has to do a better job. So all that said, I don't see a reason why Dewar isn't in this lineup again, unless it truly is a 1A, 1B type room in that left back spot. All that said, Berkey, Dewar, Josh Yarrow, Tim Parker, Thomas Totland make up the back line. Chris Durkin, Tomas Ostrak is my center mid. Celio Pompeu, Indiana Vasilev are above them. And then I've got Klaus and Rasmus Alm as my attackers. I want Alm to get back in that starting lineup as soon as he's physically able to. If it's not this week, then it should be next week. But what he offers is so significant in the press. And seeing Alm and Indy, I think, is an interesting combination together that I don't think we've seen very much. They play a similar position, kind of a similar style in their point of contact. So, yeah, I'm excited about this the more that I see it, with knowing we're not going to have Nielsen or Leuven.
That's super interesting. I think Alm, especially against RSL, is going to be a useful player. The transition is going to be big against any possession team. So I love that shout for Alm to be in, but I agree. The first thought I had was Indy and Alm play the same position often. So throwing him in at striker is an option. Yep. I wonder if perhaps we'd try Indy on the left side as well. It's not something we haven't seen. Like you said, crossing hasn't been a thing necessarily this year. Indy's a left-footed player. Who knows? But I will disagree with you. And I think that's maybe the spicy thing I will do there. Is that I think I do want to see Durkin and Ostrak. I do. If we're talking about adjustments and things needing to be fixed, I think Ostrak is maybe ahead of Klaus on let's figure out how to use Ostrak in the right way. I loved it was like week 1 or 2, Matt, that you pointed out that Ostrak is kind of getting covered up right in different situations, or it looks like he's not super comfortable, or no one knows exactly where he should be at every time. And I think that's still being worked out. He's getting a lot of minutes. And so I want to see Ostrak really get more defined week by week on what he should be doing. Other than, of course, his pressing is spot on, as we saw against Galaxy. So not complaining, but I do think there's some adjustments that can still be made there. But I think my spice will come. I'm going to put Indy on the left and Alm on the right. And I would love to still see Sam and Klaus play if possible. I know that's a big ask week by week by week with 2 all out and out strikers on the roster, basically. But there's other options. Let's just keep rolling with it. I think Sam looks incredible.
Yeah.
He didn't get those finishes last week, but he still was doing what he does and with strikers that are in form, looking as dominant as he looks when he's on the run, right? Like you just give him more and more chances. And if he's scoring every other game percentage wise, just keep giving him those chances until it becomes a problem.
Yeah, and I would fully be okay and understand, and it may even show up in our consensus starting 11 on Saturday to have Klaus and Sam there. Honestly, I might lose this vote just because how do you take Sam out in a lot of conversations? It's the same thing we talked about last week. How do you take Celio Pompeu out of this lineup? But Bradley Carnell found a way to do it.
Yeah.
And it was successful when he brought Celio in. I view right now Celio as indispensable as a guy like Sam. But that's not to say that Carnell sees them as indispensable into needing to start, because Saleo could be as much of a spark off the bench as Sam. You could want to start with AZ and then shift to Saleo. There's a lot of combinations that you could look to do. A lot of it honestly opens up with the arrival of Rasmus Alm, able to go a little more. You have some more freedom in what you can do underneath that. I mean, there's a lot of combinations that don't necessarily require you to put your perceived best 11 to start the game.
You just mentioned it though. AZ wasn't in either of our lineups. That might be something we should talk about in the future. But we're all out of time for today, unfortunately. This is Flyover Footy. You're listening on the Big 550 KTRS. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, we do go much deeper and have a longer conversation, a slower conversation, a more random conversation in our podcast. And we are about to go into the wind down. Someone made a great wind down joke, Matt. It is like the best dad joke I've heard all week.
It's too good. It's too good. And again, thank you to Noble's Vineyards for sponsoring us.
Yes.
Super excited to have you on board for the rest of the 2024 season.
That's it from us, guys. Listen on the wind down on the podcast. Thank you for listening again. Bye-bye.
And if you're watching on the live stream, we're not leaving. If you're new to Flyover Footy, we take a minute or two to gather a drink. Gee, I wonder what we're going to be drinking tonight. And then we're back for the wind down, which I'm not opposed to renaming for 2024 to wind down.
The wind down brought to you. It's too on the nose, right? It's a little too much.
Yeah. There's a poll question in the chat. TK the Brewer, did you see the City SC song yesterday? I did see that, and it reminded me, I mean, not in the way the song was. It was a cool song. It reminded me of that. There's a fan who did almost like a Broadway ballad type thing where he has a City song. I need to find that, but it was the second City song that I've heard, and I love that people are doing that. It's such a creative outlet to have like musical numbers about the club that are separate from chants.
I haven't seen this. When you come back, go get your drink, and we got to talk about this more before we.
Okay.
I haven't heard about this City SC song.
Ball Watching talked about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they have a thing on their Twitter for it.
Nice. I have my wine here. I bought this decanter when I went to Venice like ages ago. And then I went to Napa Valley with my in-laws, and I was like, I need to use this decanter I have never used now that I drink fancier wine. There's that. If you've heard of Venetian glass, that's what that is. Pinkies up. Jake, I don't know. Is Ostrak better? I don't know, man. I think he's always been about this good. I truly do. Wonder what everyone else thinks. David Goss on the pod? He might say yes. Pick him up on a free. I guess his contract's up, Doc. I like that. Yeah, I know. Goss is good. Like, doesn't he feel like when he talks, he's like one of us? He's more laid back. He's nerdy for sure, right? And he's not, even though he's an East Coaster, he's not like full of himself or like sure that he's right all the time.
All right, I'm gonna try something when you come back. I'm not gonna be able to do this on every pod. But
oh no, I'm good.
No, I know.
Oh, sorry.
So whenever you start us and you intro us, I've got.
Oh, you mean when I start us up again?
Pardon me. Yeah.
Pardon me. Oh wait, hold on. I want to bring up this. I should have done this while you were gone. I'm sorry. I was like talking it up on the chat.
I did see that David Goss is. I haven't listened to Extra Time yet that came out, but I did see something about that.
It's gonna be a little sad. I think Weeby was crying a little bit, getting choked up.
Well, I don't know if he's just off extra time or if he's off MLS. I don't know what the scope of it is because he does a lot of those like GA announcing stuff, Generation Adidas. So
yeah, he does, and he used to do all the Red Bull 2 calls as well. He does a lot of stuff in Jersey. Like if anyone needs a game called in Jersey, he's like the guy.
Yep.
What is that? I want to bring up that soccer poll thing. I want to talk a lot about that if you're okay with that.
Soccer poll.
The polling of the GMs.
Oh, I've got that in our show notes.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's that, the Dallas Cup and the GA Cup are what I want to talk about.
I'll be able to like highlight the stuff I want to cover once here we go. Thank you. Especially the second one. The first one's pretty obvious, right? The second one's more fun.
Yeah, the first one, yeah, we can let's talk through what some of the scores were, but they are a little obvious. The second one had long form quotes talking about Leagues Cup, talking about Messi, Apple TV. Yeah, it's some good stuff. Rules, roster rules.
Oh my gosh, please. I got the first one and the second one's not showing up.
We could probably go like 45 minutes just talking about this second article they had, to be quite honest.
Oh, I know. It's going to take way too long.
If you want, we should start off with the UPSL and the GA Cup side then, so we can make sure to get that in before going too long.
Yes, agree. Yeah, but we should do everything and then that. I'm with you. Where's part 2, you jerks? Oh my gosh. Oh, here we go.
The anonymous executive survey.
Okay, cool. Sorry. I found it. Apple TV deal. Okay. I'm going to hit record and we can get going. You ready?
Yeah.
Do you think
this works?
Is the sound going to be good?
No, but let's just do it.
Welcome, everyone, to the wind down. It worked. It worked.
Did you hear that? Thank you, Noble Ice Vineyards.
It's not as laid back, but it does feel more celebratory, doesn't it? Like it's time to party.
It does. Yeah, no, it feels classy. I feel classy is what's happening right now.
Oh, yeah, you're right. There's that. It does feel like we walked into like a Grey Poupon commercial.
As long as I don't continuously pour this throughout the rest of the show, we should be all right.
I know.
But it is. So I mentioned earlier, Noble Ice is sold in the St. Louis area, at least at Schnucks and Total Wine. And I did get one at Total Wine to celebrate. It's their 2019 Norton. So cheers.
Cheers. There's one thing especially I wanted to say that Matt puts a lot of time into this, guys. I don't know if you know that, but I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that Matt puts a lot of time into this whole endeavor. But Matt, what would you say, like 6-9 months ago, you started talking about possibility of sponsors, and I was a little iffy, but once I voiced my concerns, you were like, no, that's the same feeling I have. And that is that we were like, we're not going to do, discount code kind of BS. We're not going to do, I don't know. Basically, we were like, let's do something very local. Let's do something we can support someone around us as well. It's kind of a team kind of the thing. I hope all of that comes to fruition. I'm excited about lots of ideas that we can do with Noble Ice, but this is a home run. We got so lucky that someone local, someone we respect, someone involved with City, with St. Louis City SC. Yeah. Man, what a home run. Matt, you put so much work into this. I want to say thank you so much. And of course, Noble Ice for taking a chance on us. It's super cool. I hope they're happy. I hope we can pay them back for all of this, because it's going to help us do a lot more stuff as well.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what it's all about, is being able to do more of what we love in this way. However that ends up presenting itself, I don't know, but it's exciting. And it fits the criteria. Like, I wasn't BSing at the start of the KTRS portion, that it fits a lot of what we wanted. So we didn't just walk into this saying, somebody please work with us. It was, we have to know the company. They should be local. We need them to have some kind of involvement with soccer. Like, we're just not going to find a random company off the streets. As much as they might be a good company, that synergy really needs to be there. And I really do think it checked all the boxes for Noble Ice because of their involvement with St. Louis City, their local. Obviously, we like to have a drink every once in a while. This was perfect. You like wine, I like wine. It's a no-brainer, and it's exciting to have them for the whole season.
Absolutely. Super excited about that. Lots more fun. Again, I'm a big fan of wine. I've had wine several times on the show. Although I was smart enough to, I sipped on one glass. I'm going to go slow on this second one, because we all know I get passionate with that second glass. So,
well, we've got some passionate topics in this wind down, talking about the anonymous GM survey The Athletic did. But Phil, should we start it off with the Academy action that has been going on and will be going on?
Yes, please. You take it away because I've missed it. I tried to watch it last night and I signed in too late.
Yeah, right. I caught some after the game highlights or match tape rather. Not a great showing on the score sheet for City's UPSL side, who competed in basically U19, the Dallas Cup. This past week, they ended up 0-2-1 with 5 goals scored, 9 goals against the likes of FC Midtjylland, Club Santos Laguna, and SAF Botafogo FR, which is the Brazilian side. And they had a 0-1 result against Midtjylland, 2-2 against Club Santos Laguna, and 3-6 against Botafogo. So that was it was a wild few games for the UPSL side. They don't have specific goal scorers, but it's not exactly the encore performance that we were hoping, given their second place national finals result in the fall league of UPSL. But this is an exciting age group for City that's developing. And a lot of the players who had been playing for UPSL are now with City 2. And so you can see some progression there. But good experience in the Dallas Cup against these clubs from all over the world. And then after the Dallas Cup, we have the Generation Adidas Cup to look forward to for our U15s and U17s. Action actually starts on Saturday, March 30th for our U15s and U17s. They're both in group play. The U15s will be playing LAFC on Saturday. The U17s will be playing the Portland Timbers on Saturday. They both have Sunday and Monday matchups. So the 30th, 31st, and April 1st are going to be group play matches for all three, or for both of those teams, rather. Like I mentioned, the U15s starting against LAFC. The U15s will also play Atlanta United and Manchester United's academy. So that's exciting for them on April 1st. City's U17s, I mentioned the Portland Timbers is where they start. They will also play Atlanta United. And then their marquee matchup in this is Flamengo, which will be broadcast on MLS Season Pass on Apple TV+. Exciting for City's U17 team to play one of the most high-profile teams in this cup tournament in Flamengo. And it's an opportunity that I'm sure Lutz, Dale Schilly, that entire organization is kind of clamoring for. I'm excited for it to be a feature matchup on MLS Season Pass for us to watch.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. We had to work it in at some point. I listened to the Lutz Pfannenstiel City Voice podcast today. I think it's my favorite one yet, just because it's like the kind of nerdy stuff that I love the most. And I think one of my favorite parts was him talking about the UPSL team.
Yeah.
And it was his vision to create it, and why he created it was, we've talked about it a little bit, but just hearing Lutz talk about, getting these players, like maybe they're not pro material, at least they can stay in this and get, good eyes on them to go to a really good college. I think he said 26 players have moved on to a really good college from playing in the UPSL side. So that's incredible. As a dad with a son that's just now kind of getting into club soccer, he may not be, top tier material, but if he's able to get to a good team like that, I don't know, it just speaks to me as a father. I really enjoyed that he created that team and they went so far this last year. I enjoyed hearing that, but mainly, as you said, Matt, our players being able to face such high quality competition. I mean, yes, 0-2-1, that's not a fun stat to look at, but I'm happy City got to play Club America last year, even though it wasn't the best, right? I do think that was a wake-up call, and I do think it served them well throughout the rest of the season and even into this season in certain ways, even mentally. So, anytime our players can go up against really high-end competition, I'm happy, and I'm really excited about the Generation Adidas Cup as well.
And ultimately, that's one of the most exciting things about being in this kind of an ecosystem is, for better or for worse, and we don't have time at all to go down this rabbit trail, but when the DA collapsed and folded for US Soccer, MLS Next is what picked it up. And they are taking on hosting some of these things and also incorporating their teams and organizations. It's not wholly MLS, but it's a combination of MLS facilitating things in things like the Generation Adidas Cup, but also allowing the organizations the flexibility to insert other teams in competitions and in leagues like the Dallas Cup, like UPSL, that they don't control, which still provides high level competition for age ranges that they don't directly support yet. And so it's just a good ecosystem to be in, where you're given these opportunities to kind of have the best of both worlds, both inside the MLS footprint and out.
Completely agree. Anything else on those two games? Anything else we want to talk about before we kind of ruin the rest of the episode?
No, it's going to be fun to watch the U17s. I'm really looking forward to Monday at 2:30 or 1:30, I think, Central, on Apple TV, MLS Season Pass. Watching them play Flamengo is going to be a lot of fun. But don't say we're going to ruin this, because the Athletic does.
I'm excited about it. Yeah.
Of all the things the Athletic does, their anonymous GM surveys have quickly become one of my favorite things that they put out each year. I love the salary dump information. I love some of their deep dives into some other things, but this anonymous GM survey gives us a lot of insight into how the decision makers of each club really feel about the organization in which they play. Is it going in a good direction? Not just which team will win MLS Cup, which they did include that, and most people think it's Inter Miami, but a lot of the nitty gritty of, are we trending in the right direction with Apple? Are we going to a place where roster rules are going to be relaxed? Like, honest feedback, because it's anonymous. And the fact that the Athletic had 30 of these chief soccer officer type positions, so 30 decision makers of the 29 clubs, you would imagine that Lutz Pfannenstiel or Diego's voice was among them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think they're the kind of guys that would be happy to contribute to that kind of thing. One of my favorite things about even leading into this is the way that they talk about this. It feels like the intro to Law and Order, where it's like, in the justice system. And then, they kind of go into it. This is Law and Order. They were like, it kind of like, it shows their like quality journalism, right? They come from a journalist point of view, not like a pure soccer point of view, but they're like, in exchange for their candor, we give them anonymity. And I love that, because to them, it's like a little bit of a journalism no-no to just post anonymous stuff, right? But it is so candid, this information we're getting.
Yeah.
And it's so good that, like, I love hearing from those types of people, because it affects even my opinions on things. It helped me kind of see their side of the story. And so this is my favorite article, now 2 articles of the year every year, because it just, like, I can read this and I can form a better opinion than I would if I was just like uninformed as a podcaster or as a fan.
Yeah, and that anonymity is key, not just to get the honest feedback, but if you do it in the right way, it could be so impactful. And they do it in such a correct way, where you're not just getting an anonymous source to badmouth somebody. You're really being productive with your insights, and you're giving such a vision into the league that we otherwise wouldn't have. And I don't care as much about, now that's the other thing, is the decision making of, by anonymity, you're not tying names to it. I don't necessarily care if it was Garth Lagerwey. I don't care if it was Lutz Pfannenstiel. I don't mind seeing one chief soccer officer said, or one of the sporting director. I don't mind that. It doesn't matter whose voice necessarily, when you have so much volume of insight.
It takes away my bias in a lot of ways. So I actually enjoy it. Chris Gebhardt had a good one. Names have been changed to protect the innocent. That's what I should have led with that. Where was I?
There are no chief soccer officers that are innocent.
Fair enough, actually. But Matt, why don't you lead into a couple of your favorite topics, and I'm sure we'll be able to chat about each one.
Well, I mean, I almost don't want to talk as much about Leagues Cup because of how that tournament has sort of become tainted given what's gone on with the US Open Cup. But there wasn't much surprise, I think, from a Leagues Cup perspective. Like, nothing earth shattering was said, because everybody shared our vision. It seemed like they thought this is a hokey, gimmicky tournament. But the most impactful thing that I think somebody noted is that they saw firsthand the stadium was filled with Mexican fans that had not been to their venue. They know for a fact they had not been to the venue to watch their team. So you have a lot of the first-time viewers, and they were passionate about wanting their team, their MLS team, to lose. And that's such an impactful thing to extend to, you would assume, those in your community who you haven't been able to invite. Maybe they are distrustful of MLS. Maybe they have their team in Liga MX and they're satisfied with that. But to be able to pull I think it's the most popular league in the country into your stadiums for a dedicated World Cup style tournament, that's huge. And they call that out. They're saying they were skeptical, but genuinely it was a big hit. And they caught themselves watching other games in the tournament, not just because it was messy, not just because it was a team that they were scouting, but just to enjoy the tournament. And so whether it was initiated because of the Messi hype, because that was his debut, that was the first time we actually got to see him in an Inter Miami uniform, or whether it was the newness and the quality of competition, I think that played into it as well. I shared their excitement with this tournament, and I thought it was fascinating that they really mirrored a lot of fan sentiment in distrusting it at first, and then coming around to seeing the value to it. But like I said, it's all kind of at this point a little bit tainted because of the U.S. Open Cup controversy, which is a shame, because while one exec does call it imperfect, they don't like it pushing the playoffs. The fact is that a dedicated enclosed tournament like that is exciting.
I related well to the guy that said, I thought this was going to be stupid. I thought it wasn't going to
Yeah.
work. But it turned out, it did. Right. And you can, again, no love lost for the Leagues Cup, in my opinion, at this point, but I can definitely understand someone in charge of, financial aspects of a club seeing those Mexican fans come in. Like any owner of a business, anything that gets 50, 100, thousands of people into your business that aren't usually there, especially when you feel like you have a really good product, right? You get a bunch of fans even in St. Louis that aren't from there. I think a lot of those Club America fans weren't even from St. Louis, but they walked into that stadium. It was beautiful. The food was good. The product was good. The game wasn't a blowout, right? So that means it wasn't like it was a bad competition. Hopefully those fans walked away saying, "Oh man, that club knows what they're doing. It's a nice stadium. It's a good product. It feels like a European style environment, or even a Latino style environment, because we had Santos there. So those are all good things, and it builds clout. It's the kind of thing that any business owner would enjoy. So I can relate to that a little bit, and it's hard to deny it at this point for that reason. And I think that leads into like the Apple TV stuff. I found very interesting, because I think we were all curious how that was going to work out, whether we thought streaming only was going to be okay, right? A lot of people were worried, like, well, what if someone walks into a bar and they want to watch the game? Like, you can't just tell them to turn it on. It turns out it doesn't seem like it's been a bad deal. I love the comments about Apple wanting to be innovative. I love the comments about Apple caring enough that they want to make it a better product throughout the season. They wanted to use as much interconnectivity, a lot of stuff with other corporations like Adidas and technology, on the forefront. If we had just teamed up with someone like, like sometimes you see those Fox News broadcasts. It's not Fox News. So sorry. Fox Sports. Some of those FS1 broadcasts were like just really terrible when you were watching the national team or even some of the MLS games. It wasn't something special. With Apple TV, it's a massive package. It looks good, right? It looks like the visuals are good. And all the things I mentioned already, it feels like a big win. And it's nice to hear that these CFOs and sporting directors agree.
I thought it was fascinating that they did like the presentation. They liked the dedication that Apple was able to provide them. They again mirrored our thoughts on kickoff times, wanting them to see a little bit more spread out, because you couldn't watch as many matches as you might have previously.
Agree.
It was great to have it all on one platform. It was great that I think the uniformity of the presentation was great, but the fact that you had all the kickoffs at one time was bad. So they shared that sentiment. My takeaway from their Apple comments was, and this is where Matt Doyle was brought in, is they want to see more of a Monday Night Football in the Premier League on Sky Sports, where you have former players who are analysts like Thierry Henry, Jamie Carragher, guys like that, who provide such advanced knowledge of the game. They really break down the X's and O's. They draw on the board. They show the replays. there's such an in the weeds of tactics that they present, because it's the same philosophy that we have in a lot of ways. It's we on Flyover, that is. It's that the more you know about the game, the more you understand what's going on between the lines, the more you're going to enjoy it. Like being an informed fan is, and a knowledgeable fan is being an entertained fan. And that's the one thing I think I do want to see more from MLS Season Pass is a willingness to share that knowledge and to go more than just surface level. I completely agreed with the executives that said, also said, I want the commentators to be less company men and more honest. So in addition to getting into the X's and O's, analyzing the games, talking about, you have to be able to share honest opinions. It became very boring because of very milk toast in terms of commentating. No one criticized anything, and that's not good commentating. And I totally agree. But I don't know if we're going to get change on that. And I point to the referee situation recently as reason why, knowing that Apple and or MLS gave very specific instructions to their announcing crews of don't belabor the point. Talk about it in the intro, acknowledge it, and then move on. Don't mention it at all. So suspect calls in the game, close things, issues, cards, they never mentioned the fact that these were replacement or scab refs because they were under instruction not to. That's the kind of thing where it's a 10-year Apple deal. We're only in year 2, but you got to pull the reins back on that. Be willing to accept criticism on the broadcast. I mean, that's if you want to grow and not feel sterilized, you have to be willing to put criticism of your product on your product.
That's massive. It's something corporations never get, right? It just feels like they, it's, I don't know. There's so many things. I hate it, but I can't vocalize it right now. So
I do think a lot of the things that they mentioned about the Apple deal, though, besides those issues, I mean, it is trending in a positive direction, and they did make changes on the fly, whether it's in their presentation, whether it's updating, changing certain times that they're airing certain things, like the wrap up or 360, how they do certain things. I did appreciate that. So it's not like you set it and you forget it, you review it at the end of the year, and then you make changes for the next year. There was some pretty, I can't remember it offhand, but I think it was relating to the way on MLS 360 that they would cut away from games. Like they wouldn't just talk while the games were happening. They would cut away to the studio, show the studio analysts as opposed to the games. That got better throughout the year. And so I look for more of that, where you now have this platform that it's not just giving you an infusion of money, but it's providing you with probably one of the best potential for presentation in your broadcast of any of the big 5 or 6 leagues. Apple is so massive in that regard, from their underlying stats to what they are able to put out, and they're just visually pleasing, if simplistic style at times. I look for them to build off that. And I think the way that the sporting directors kind of shared that sentiment in a lot of ways, it was another, oh yeah, these guys are just like us kind of thing.
I felt that a lot actually in this article, which is a good thing, more than I felt the opposite, right? It was only a few statements where I was like, well, I don't know who the hell that guy is, but he's wrong. No. But there was a lot of Matt Doyle love in this article. I thought was
strange,
hilarious. But it was a good point where they said they wanted better analysis because players have a very distinct perspective, right? But having someone like a GM or a coach be able to talk about player movement and tactical movement as well. But they were talking about like someone who has the knowledge of the inner workings of player movement as far as like transfers and things like that. It's something they were wanting. That's not exactly what you said earlier, is it, Matt?
Similar, yeah.
Okay, sorry if I just repeated you.
I didn't call out Doyle as much though, by intent. He did get a lot of love because he's one of the only people, and he is a non-player, to go deep into the metrics like that.
Yeah, but you mentioned players, and so one comment said he didn't want players. He said he wanted something else, and that was one of the guys that liked Doyle. So that was just fun to watch. What's the next one for you, Matt?
Oh, it's the rules. I thought that
I'm ready.
And so this is I walked away from this article after reading the rules section, And I'm frustrated more than anything because I'm maybe antsy is the right way to put it. I'm antsy for some of these changes to take place because it really seemed like an overwhelming consensus to the things that we always talk about. Wanting to have more flexibility in how you spend, if not what you can spend. So taking all of these minutiae of GAM and TAM, U22s, DPs, and making it more standardized so that if you wanted to spend more overall up and down your roster, you can, putting a floor, putting a ceiling, whatever that manifests itself into. But then I realized I walked away from it thinking, okay, these are all the decision makers of sport at these clubs who talk directly to the owners who have a seat at the table to make these decisions. So, where is the disconnect if so many of these sporting directors and chiefs of soccer feel that all of these MLS rules need to be opened up? Or at least that's the impression that was given, because we don't know the quantity of the sporting directors who said this. It just that's what the quotes all were about, and that's how the article was framed: is that they want to have more flexibility in spending, even if there are some allowances for, okay, you can keep the DPs, but we want to give the cap able to be spent more up and down the roster as opposed to these just only 3 or 5 or 6 spots. If something doesn't happen in the next week or not week, in the next year or 2 or 3 with these changes being implemented, then you have to wonder, where is the disconnect between the owners and the sporting directors, and why is there a disconnect? What is the issue if they're being told we want to have more flexibility in our decision making? That was one of my big takeaways. The other ones were um, mostly still following the same fact that they share our sentiments. The 30-man roster size as a limiting factor to building your roster is much more constrictive than the game needs right now. More roster slots because you're playing more games. You They've had the same amount of roster slots since before Leagues Cup, obviously. There's just before teams were going further into CCL. I mean, there's just so many more games played by so many more teams that 30 players doesn't really like. Why have a hard cap like that, or the lack of being able to call up from Next Pro? And then there was an interesting one that I saw about MLS Next Pro in and of itself is there's a comment that one of the sporting directors wanted to see Next Pro players play a handful of times before having to offer a contract. So almost like being able to take more flyers on Next Pro players without being committed to them and use it as a trial period before you can sign them. Or maybe that relates to signing them to an MLS contract. It's interesting in how Next Pro could be used as more of a straight up reserve team as opposed to another professional team in the pyramid.
Yeah, that's kind of what I want to focus on. But you mentioned, I think one of the big questions, this pertains to one of the things you said here, is one of the questions was, will they reform the rules, right? And one, there's I want to mention the good and the bad, right? One said, nope, no way, right? Immediately,
Mm-hmm.
just that's all he said. Another said, I think they will. I just think it's going to take way too long. We're going to lose this window with Messi, and it'll be something maybe around the World Cup, hopefully not after the World Cup, right? Another
Yeah.
said, yes, this is my favorite one. Yes, but whether it's before Commissioner Don Garber leaves or not is a different story. That's the real question. Is it before a wholesale change in executive leadership or not? We'll see. That, to me, I
Yeah.
beat him by about 4 days. I had this exact thought, but Matt, you had something kind of loaded there to say.
No, the thing that I really liked is the luxury tax model. I've argued on our show before that that would be an exciting thing, and whether it happens with or without Don Garber or the leadership as it exists now, I think that's a really interesting way to look at how you can allow some of the teams who may want to spend to do so while still benefiting the teams that don't want to spend. And when I say teams that don't want to spend, I mean owners, obviously. Like if you have the Crafts who don't want to spend on the Revs, but then you have the
Yes.
Arthur Blank that wants to spend on Atlanta United, maybe Atlanta United goes above the salary cap, quote unquote, and they have to pay a luxury tax to MLS, and that luxury tax gets split between all the teams that are under that cap or that are in compliance or haven't spent to a certain amount. I don't know what that would look like, but it's still a model that would allow your team to spend if it wants to spend, and it would still benefit everybody else, still keeping that single entity, keeping the happy family type thing in mind. The comparison in the article was the Kansas City Royals to the New York Yankees, and the fact that MLS can't, you don't allow teams to spend that divergently. You have to keep things very close. You aren't allowing a team to be the New York Yankees type of a thing, and I think that's something that MLS has seen with Inter Miami, and I think they like it. The reason, not the reason that I think Inter Miami is an impetus for the changes we're talking about isn't just they want to, isn't just they're having success with bringing in Messi and Suarez and Alba and Busquets and all these players, but it is bringing in the eyes from other countries, bringing in the subscriptions to MLS Season Pass. It's good for the business, and it is a repeatable model if you allow a team to almost self-identify as that. So when those 4 or 5 players leave in the next year or two, Inter Miami, what if they want to redo this whole thing again? What if they want to go out and build another super team of aging players of the next generation, so to speak? If they want to be that team, they want to be the New York Yankees, where they're signing and putting all these high profile players on their team year after year after year. They're not going to be allowed to do that necessarily every single time unless something changes with the overall roster rules. And that's just a benefit to MLS to be able to have teams do this to themselves, self-identify as these types of teams, and fans will want to tune into that. You'll get buys and eyes from the home countries of whoever you're pulling in from, whether it's Argentina or wherever. And that's again good for business, that I think is going to be as much of a reason we see some of these changes as anything else.
I agree. One thing you kind of mentioned there is like the Crafts and the Cronkies of the world.
I didn't say that word. I was specifically avoiding that word.
Well, it's a negative connotation here, so I like to mention
That's fair.
Cronky when we're about to be a little negative about it. But these are not the guys spending the money, right? These are not the owners in this poll. These are just the guys that get to spend the money that they're given, right? And so, the mention of Don Garber there, I just love that statement because Don Garber is beholden to the owners. And so maybe the owners are the problem. But it occurred to me that if Garber wasn't there, like I think for MLS to become what it is now, to be as big as it is, no complaints. If I'm just talking about growth alone, I'm not a fan of Garber and the way things have, what this has turned into in some ways. But if you look at growth and the size of the league, Messi, all this stuff that's happened, especially this year with Apple Plus and Messi together, World Cup on the horizon, Garber was the right guy, probably, honestly. I'll say it. But if we want to take the next step to become really big, I think Garber needs to be gone. And I think that's kind of what the executive was like in a not so nice, a little bit polite way to say it. But I think once we're done growing, and maybe the finish line is the World Cup, I hope it's 2 years before the World Cup. No, that's this year, right? So never mind. Yeah. But I guess it's too late. But once we're done growing, I truly think Garber needs to leave, and it needs to be a soccer guy. Like, I'm a big fan of Edwards from the USL. I thought he was really good. He was like a soccer guy that also figured out the business side and was able to grow. I think it would be fun to like grow to the size we need and then hone this league into something better. And a couple of these quotes, it's like one guy says it just needs to be stripped down to the bare bones again. That's not a direct quote, but he basically says it needs to be stripped down. The roster rules need to be just stripped down to nothing and rebuilt from scratch because it is such a mess.
Yeah. And
what you said there, Matt, is like these guys know soccer. These guys know business at the same time. And so what they want, it's what you and I have been calling for forever. It's what most soccer leagues are doing in general. And it doesn't matter if it's a luxury tax. It doesn't matter how it works. I think that's a great idea. I agree with you. I think it needs to happen. But mainly, I understand like balancing competitive, games, a competitive league, but also I love so many of these guys were quoting saying, let us build the way we want. You'll get a diversity of styles of rosters, just like you said with Kansas City Royals versus the Yankees. It's really good for Miami to be the evil villain of the MLS right now. And it's so cool to see St. Louis City. And last thing I'll say is that a few of these, let me find the quote. I apologize, Matt. This might take me just 1 second. The flexibility, only a minority have asked for this in this article, but my favorite part, because this is the stuff that would benefit City more than it would benefit Miami or LAFC. This quote, I want our next pro players to play 8 to 10 times before we have to offer a contract.
Yeah.
Others pointed to the 30-man roster size as limiting at a time when teams are playing more games than ever. Does that sound familiar with the Open Cup? More roster slots as we're playing more games, one exec said. That needs to happen. So my point being, every time Miami wants to make the rosters more open, Arthur Blank wants to open up the roster slots, let us spend the money. Every time that happens, I need City ownership and front office guys saying, you can do that if you expand the roster sizes. Like, it needs to be a one and, right? It can't be one or the other, because we also, it helps us be a selling league. It helps the youth to come up. And that is one of the best romantic stories that MLS has outside of the Open Cup, is letting these young kids, these young Americans especially, grow up and get sold on to Europe. And that happens with letting us play people like Johnny Klein, Caden Glover, by having 8 to 10 possibilities. Wenzel, right? I would love to play Wenzel 8 to 10 times this season. So I know I went on a long rant there, but it is really important to me to open up the rules, not just for money, but for roster sizes. It's vital. It needs to happen in City, Philadelphia, Red Bulls. These are the teams that need to be fighting for this.
Some of those teams are impacted by another thing that I really like in this article, which is the abolishment of homegrown territories. This is one of those rules that nobody really pays attention to because it doesn't directly impact the first team in obvious ways, but it's the legitimate carving up of a map of the United States and saying, if you're growing up close to St. Louis, you are property of St. Louis City if you were to go to MLS. And this has caused players to bypass MLS entirely. Some have gone to USL, some have gone abroad as soon as they can in those deals, because they don't want to play for a team that just happens to be close to them, but they have no affiliation to. They didn't go to the academy. They didn't have any kind of training by them. They just live near a team, and suddenly they are rights of one of the teams. That makes no sense in today's landscape. I could make it make sense in my brain when MLS was in its infancy, and you had to do that kind of a thing to help your teams. But scouting is so much more advanced in MLS now than it had been, and it's not necessary, and it also restricts, like I said, some of the players and their ability to actually play in MLS, or their desire to. And then the other thing.
Can I say one thing just about that quickly?
Yeah, please.
If MLS, like, the best thing that MLS can do for USL is keep these homegrown contracts going for real. Like, capitalism should have done away with this forever ago, and MLS should have wised up ages ago about getting rid of those, because they're losing players to USL for that exact reason. But one other cool thing that happened, it's somewhat related, is that John Morrissey from USL Tactics mentioned the amount of players moving between MLS Next Pro and USL League One and USL Championship is a ton.
It is.
It might get into the 3 digits in the next couple of years if the status quo keeps up. It's an interesting thing to watch in that regard as well. So just keep your eyes on that. I wanted to mention it, but Matt, thanks for letting me get that in as you move to your next topic here.
Yeah, I was going to cover that last bit in the article, which is talking about cheating in the rules, and how there does seem to be a prevailing thought that the cheating is getting less. I almost said better, but what does that mean? Less, because cheating has always been prevalent in these kind of rules, and part of the thing that needs to change is the closed bookness of all of the wheelings and dealings of teams. The existence of GAM and TAM and it not being public knowledge invites cheating. It invites not using it in appropriate ways, because you don't have public scrutiny. You don't have reporters. You don't have journalists, investigators who are at least trying to keep tabs and saying something doesn't seem like it checks out, and then being able to put pressure on the team in the league when you have all these hidden machinations of money being spent on things that don't exist in real life. You can't help but be suspected of cheating. And the most egregious is obviously Inter Miami, where they have somehow built what they've built and can replace an injured U22 with another $8 million U22. It's so much of it is closed to public consumption that there's a side of it where you can say people would be more a fan of the league and be more interested if you can let them play Football Manager with the books that teams have to have public. It's the same thing with like the NFL, Major League Baseball's hot stove. Like if you have that available, it's more consumable for fans. There's a market for that. But also on the flip side, just the fact that it invites cheating and invites scandal when you don't have to be open, and people just barely figure out how to raise a red flag, like with Blaise Matuidi a few years ago. They're so it's such a system that it doesn't benefit anybody to have it closed the way it is, and it has this kind of a ending to a column where it's talking about cheating, and everybody's kind of saying, yeah, we know it's happened before. It might be less now, but the fact that you have to have that conversation tells you there's problems with your system.
I completely agree. And I was having trouble putting it into words earlier, but I think there's an overarching idea that everything MLS does that's in-house is like up for scrutiny unless there's like someone else involved, because like you said, MLS is hiding a lot of information. To be honest with you, when Miami got rid of Gregore and Moda, I really do think Miami probably did it by the rules at that point. I don't have too many doubts. But the fact that like none of it is available to be scrutinized is the problem, right? And the same for, just to go back to Apple TV, like I don't think MLS should be paying the paychecks of the guys doing the commentary. I know that in the USL, there was a mix of like, at first, right? It was a mess in some ways because some of the local guys were terrible commentators, but it was nice to get local commentators who weren't connected to the USL. You could trust every word they said, even if some of the stuff they said was wildly incorrect. You know what I mean? But you could trust it. Like you knew they weren't like biased for the league. And it was the same. They had and outs like basically headhunters who would go out and find play-by-play and color commentators. Those guys would hire the people. They would assign the people to the games, I'm sure with guidance from the league, but the league wasn't saying, the league didn't like reach out to them and be like, don't say this, don't do this. There was another company that was their manager that was signing their paychecks. And man, it sucks that this is a 10-year Apple deal, but it'd be really nice if that's where they moved after this. I mean, extra time is great until it's not, right? So
the silence of the US Open Cup was deafening.
God, it was awful. And you can tell what those guys' opinions are, but it's clear that like, you know, Sasha Klenshin didn't say anything after his first comment. He's been able to do some other things. I've really been watching that closely to see what happens, right? Because I'm scared.
Yeah, and that's where you go back to even the CSOs wanting to see more, not just analytical conversations, but more constructive conversations. If call a spade a spade. It's obvious to the people watching what's going on, but to not hear it from the announcers, it's no better than the closed books of the teams. You feel there's something being purposefully withheld, and there's no good reason for it. Like we all see what's happening here. Talk about it, put it out there, say something, invite the conversation, because you're going to get more engagement and more respect if you do so.
Yeah, I mean, this is a little political. I'll just say it and leave it for you guys to do whatever you want with it. But there's a reason our generation is like not trusting news anymore. It's because it's exactly like this. It's being handed down. It's not something we can trust. It's corporatized and being controlled by money rather than information, but rather than talent, rather than, you know, the truth, right? The truth is what we're after. Humans understand these things. So, you know, in the long run, it is better to stick to, you know, some kind of independence or some kind of clarity, you know. So anyway, I mean, that's all I have to say about that. But I think MLS would do better to get away from it. I don't see it happening. They're very corporate, but and they like control. But let's see. Maybe after Garber, right? To me, that's the cheering line going forward is maybe after Garber.
Yeah, I just hope the volume of owners who are listening to these chief soccer officers, sporting directors, is high enough that some of the meaningful change they mentioned can actually start to occur. And especially that I think the tides are starting to shift, but I hope they continue towards opening up this kind of spending that 10, 15 years ago, the majority obviously didn't want.
I think it was FDR that said that the United States is a massive steamboat that can't just change direction, right? It takes time. MLS has gotten very big. And so to get them to change as much as this article lays out is wanted to be changed, as much as we talk about, as much as fans want, it might take a lot of time. It might take a lot of doing. And again, like you said, Matt, it's the owners. They're the ones that have the say, and they might be the hardest to convince. So
that's right.
We should stop there. Yeah.
Let's call it a night. It's been a fun night. This has been a fun night.
Thanks for letting me rant a little bit there, Matt.
I'm always happy to oblige with a nice glass of wine in hand.
That's right. Thanks again to Noble Ice. Thank you for listening. If you made it this far, that's it. Thank you guys. We'll talk to you later next time.
Go City.